A struggling artist helps an old man cross the street unaware he's a famous critic looking for new talent. The thought had never occurred to Marcus as he extended his paint-stained hand that cold November morning. How could it? His mind was elsewhere, consumed by the eviction notice taped to his apartment door and the rejection letter crumpled in his coat pocket. Rain tapped against the sidewalk in a melancholy rhythm that matched his mood. 3 years in New York, and what did he have to show for it? A collection of canvases stacked against the walls of his soon-to-be former apartment, each one a testament to dreams that refused to materialize. Galleries had stopped returning his calls months ago. His bank account held enough for maybe 2 more weeks of ramen noodles. His mother's voice echoed in his mind. Art is a lovely hobby, Marcus, but not a career. The crosswalk signal blinked impatiently as Marcus noticed the elderly man hesitating at the curb. Something in the man's uncertain posture, the slight tremble in his gloved hands clutching a wooden cane, pulled Marcus from his spiral of self-pity. "Excuse me, sir," Marcus said, his voice gentle. "Would you like some help crossing?" The old man turned, revealing a face etched with decades of life, deep lines around keen blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Those eyes studied Marcus for a moment before crinkling at the corners. "That would be most appreciated, young man." His voice was cultured, with a hint of an accent Marcus couldn't quite place. European, perhaps. The old man's wool coat was well-worn, but impeccably maintained, much like its owner. Marcus offered his arm, and the man's gloved hands settled there with surprising strength. Together they stepped off the curb, moving at a careful pace. "Nasty weather we're having," Marcus offered, immediately regretting the banality of discussing weather with a stranger. "I find it rather honest," the old man replied, his gaze forward. "The sun can deceive, making things appear more beautiful than they are. Rain shows the truth of a place. The colors deepen. Textures reveal themselves." The observation caught Marcus off guard. It was precisely how he felt about painting in different lights, something he'd never been able to adequately explain to others. "That's actually profound," Marcus said. The old man chuckled. "Not profound, just the observation of someone who spent too many years looking at things." They reached the opposite curb, but instead of continuing on, the old man paused. He was studying Marcus's hands. "You're an artist." Not a question, but a statement. Marcus looked down at his fingers, perpetually stained with blues and reds that never quite washed away. "Trying to be?" "No," the old man said firmly. "One doesn't try to be an artist. One simply is or isn't. The paint on your hands suggests you are." A gust of wind sent a shiver through Marcus. He'd left his apartment in such a hurry that morning, desperate to escape the reality of the eviction notice, that he'd forgotten his scarf. "You're cold," the old man observed, "and I've kept you standing in this dreadful weather. Allow me to thank you properly. There's a cafe just there." He nodded toward a small establishment tucked between a bookstore and a dry cleaner. "Would you join me for coffee?" "My treat, of course." Marcus hesitated. He had planned to spend the day visiting yet another gallery, portfolio in hand, pride in pocket. But something about the old man's direct gaze made rejection seem impossible. "I'd like that," Marcus found himself saying. The cafe was warm and smelled of cinnamon and coffee beans. They settled at a corner table, steaming mugs between them. The old man removed his gloves methodically, one finger at a time, revealing hands nearly as paint-stained as Marcus's own, though his stains seemed embedded in the creases of age rather than from recent work. "My name is Heinrich," the old man said. "Heinrich Wolf." "Marcus Tate," Marcus replied, wrapping his cold fingers around the warm ceramic mug. "Now, Marcus Tate, tell me why an artist looks so defeated on a perfectly good rainy Tuesday." The question, asked with such directness yet compassion, broke something inside Marcus. Perhaps it was the warmth after the cold, or the first human connection he'd had in weeks that wasn't transactional or rejecting. Words spilled out like paint from an overturned jar. He told Heinrich about his childhood in rural Pennsylvania, how he'd sold his first painting to a neighbor at 14, how he'd worked 3 jobs to save enough to move to New York, how his distinctive style, modern impressionism with bold, almost violent color choices, had initially garnered interest, but never quite enough for representation. How his savings had dwindled, then vanished. How the eviction notice had appeared this morning like a period at the end of a failed sentence. Heinrich listened, his weathered face revealing nothing but attentive interest. When Marcus finally ran out of words, embarrassed by his uncharacteristic outpouring, Heinrich simply nodded. "And your work?" "Where is it now?" "Stacked against the walls of my apartment." "Well, not my apartment for much longer." Heinrich took a contemplative sip of his coffee. I would like to see it. Marcus nearly choked on his coffee. My paintings? Why? Because I asked. Heinrich said simply. Is that not reason enough? There was something in the old man's demeanor that brooked no argument. Marcus found himself nodding. It's not far from here, but I should warn you, it's not much to look at. The apartment, I mean. Heinrich waved a dismissive hand. I care about what's inside the apartment, not its appearance. They finished their coffee in companionable silence before venturing back into the rain, which had softened to a gentle mist. Marcus offered his arm again, and Heinrich took it, though Marcus suspected the old man didn't need the support as much as he'd initially thought. The walk to Marcus's fifth-floor walk-up was slow but steady. Heinrich paused only once on the third-floor landing to catch his breath. When they finally reached the apartment, Marcus felt a flush of shame as he unlocked the door. The space was tiny, barely 400 square feet, with a mattress on the floor in one corner and a makeshift kitchen in another. But what dominated the room were the canvases, stacked against every wall, some hanging from improvised wire hangers, others propped on the single chair. Heinrich stood in the doorway for a long moment, his eyes sweeping the space. Then without a word, he moved to the nearest canvas, studying it with an intensity that made Marcus want to flee. The painting depicted a woman at a bus stop, her face turned away, but her posture conveying a weariness that seemed to bend the very air around her. The background was a riot of blues and purples, the woman herself rendered in subdued ochres and umbers. May I? Heinrich asked, gesturing to the next canvas in the stack. Of course, Marcus said, though something about Heinrich's methodical examination made his heart race. For the next hour, Heinrich moved through the apartment, examining each painting with the same careful attention. He asked questions occasionally, about technique, about inspiration, about the stories behind certain pieces. Marcus answered as best he could, growing increasingly perplexed by the old man's interest. Finally, Heinrich lowered himself carefully onto the single chair, his cane resting against his knee. You have a remarkable eye, Marcus Tate. Your technical skills need refinement. Your brushwork becomes erratic when you're unsure, but your instinct for emotional truth is uncommon. Marcus stared at the old man, unsure how to respond to such a specific critique. Thank you, I think. Heinrich smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his stern features. It was meant as a compliment, I assure you. Now I have a proposition for you. A proposition? I know someone who might be interested in your work. Someone who could help you. Would you allow me to arrange a meeting? Hope flickered in Marcus's chest, but he quickly tamped it down. He'd had similar offers before, well-meaning individuals who knew someone who knew someone. They had all led to nothing. That's very kind of you, Heinrich, but before you refuse, Heinrich interrupted. Let me be clear. This isn't charity. I believe your work has merit, significant merit. It simply needs the right eyes to see it. There was something in Heinrich's tone, a certainty, an authority, that gave Marcus pause. Who is this person? An old friend, someone who owns a small gallery in Chelsea. Chelsea, the heart of New York's art scene. Galleries there didn't look at unknown artists without representation. They certainly didn't take meetings arranged by random elderly men met on street corners. And yet, what would I need to do? Marcus asked cautiously. Prepare your best work. 5 pieces, no more. I'll make a call and we'll go together. Tomorrow, if possible. You said time is of the essence with your... Heinrich glanced at the eviction notice still lying on the floor where Marcus had dropped it that morning. Tomorrow, Marcus agreed, still not entirely believing this conversation was happening. Heinrich nodded once sharply, then rose to his feet. Good. Now, if you would be so kind as to call me a taxi, I believe I've imposed on your hospitality long enough. It's no imposition, Marcus said quickly. Actually, this is the most interesting thing that's happened to me in months. A fleeting smile crossed Heinrich's face. Then we shall have to remedy the dullness of your life, young Marcus. Starting tomorrow. After Heinrich left, Marcus stood in the middle of his apartment, surrounded by his paintings, feeling as though he'd dreamed the entire encounter. But the business card Heinrich had pressed into his hand before leaving was real enough. It contained only a name, Heinrich Wolf, and a phone number. No title, no company. Marcus spent the evening sorting through his work, trying to select the 5 pieces that best represented his vision. It was nearly midnight when his phone buzzed with a text from Heinrich's number. Gallery appointment confirmed for 2 p.m. I'll meet you at your apartment at 1:30. Bring only the 5 pieces. Nothing more. Marcus texted back a simple, thank you, and then sat on the edge of his mattress, staring at the paintings he'd selected. For the first time in months, he felt something dangerous stir in his chest. Hope. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the previous day's rain having washed the city clean. Marcus woke early, too nervous to sleep. He spent the morning carefully wrapping his selected paintings in brown paper, then unwrapping them, second-guessing his choices, before wrapping them again. By the time 1:30 arrived, Marcus had changed his shirt 3 times and had almost convinced himself that Heinrich wouldn't show up. But precisely at 1:30, a knock came at his door. Heinrich stood in the hallway, more formally dressed than the day before. His charcoal suit was impeccably tailored, his cane exchanged for one with a silver handle. "Are you ready?" he asked without preamble. Marcus nodded, suddenly unable to speak. He gathered his wrapped paintings, and together they made their way downstairs where a black town car waited at the curb. "I took the liberty," Heinrich explained, seeing Marcus's surprise. "The paintings will be safer this way." The drive to Chelsea was mostly silent. Marcus stared out the window, watching the city slide by, while Heinrich made a single phone call in what sounded like German. The gallery when they arrived was not what Marcus had expected. Instead of the sleek, minimalist space he'd imagined, it was housed in a converted townhouse, its facade unassuming. The sign beside the door read simply, "Wolf Gallery." Marcus turned to Heinrich, a question forming on his lips, but the old man was already ascending the steps to the entrance, leaving Marcus to follow with his paintings. Inside, the space opened up dramatically. High ceilings, natural light streaming through skylights, white walls displaying a carefully curated collection of contemporary works. A young woman at the reception desk looked up as they entered, her eyes widening slightly. "Mr. Narnern, Wolf," she said, rising quickly. "We weren't expecting you today." Heinrich waved a dismissive hand. "Is Clara here?" "In her office." "Shall I?" "No need. We'll go back." Heinrich turned to Marcus. "Sir, to come." Marcus followed, his confusion mounting. The receptionist's reaction, the gallery name, a coincidence, surely. Heinrich led him through the main gallery space to a hallway at the back. He knocked once on a door marked "Director," before pushing it open without waiting for a response. A woman sat behind a desk, her silver hair cut in a sharp bob that accentuated her strong features. She looked up, irritation crossing her face before recognition set in. "Her kin name." "Heinrich," she said, rising. "This is unexpected." "Clara," Heinrich replied. "I've brought someone I'd like you to meet. This is Marcus Tate, a promising young artist who needs wall space." Clara's gaze shifted to Marcus, who stood awkwardly clutching his wrapped paintings, feeling increasingly like he'd stepped into someone else's life. "Heinrich," Clara said carefully, "we have procedures for new artists. Portfolio submissions, committee reviews." Yes, Heinrich interrupted. "Bureaucracy. We can dispense with that. Look at his work first, then decide if your procedures are necessary." Clara and Heinrich stared at each other for a long moment, some unspoken communication passing between them. Finally, Clara sighed. "Very well. Let's see what you brought, Mr. Tate." The next 30 minutes were among the most surreal of Marcus's life. He unwrapped his paintings and placed them carefully against the wall of Clara's office, while she and Heinrich watched in silence. When all 5 were displayed, Clara approached them, examining each one with the same methodical attention Heinrich had shown the day before. Finally, she turned to Heinrich. "You're right. There's something here." Heinrich nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I'm rarely wrong about these things." Clara turned to Marcus. "Mr. Tate, your work shows promise. Raw talent, certainly, though your technique needs refinement. Heinrich clearly sees something in you, and I've learned to trust his eye." She paused. "Are you represented by anyone currently?" Marcus shook his head, still not entirely sure what was happening. "Good. Then I'd like to discuss the possibility of including 2 of these pieces in our Emerging Artists exhibition next month. It's a group show, but it gets good attendance from collectors and critics." Marcus blinked. "I'm sorry, but who exactly are you? And how do you know Heinrich?" Clara looked surprised, then turned to Heinrich with a raised eyebrow. "You didn't tell him." Heinrich shrugged. "It didn't seem relevant to our initial interaction." Clara sighed and extended her hand to Marcus. "Clara Wolf, gallery director and Heinrich's daughter. And Heinrich is just an old man who appreciates good art." Heinrich interrupted firmly. Clara gave her father a look that suggested this was an old argument. Heinrich is being modest. He was one of the most influential art critics in Europe for decades before he retired. His opinion still carries significant weight in certain circles. Marcus felt the floor shift beneath him. Heinrich Wolf. The name suddenly clicked into place. The author of Modernism's Children, a seminal text Marcus had studied in art school. The critic whose reviews could make or break careers. The man he'd helped across the street in the rain. "You're Heinrich Wolf," Marcus said numbly. "I believe we established that yesterday." Heinrich replied, amusement in his eyes. "But you're an old man who needed help crossing a street." Heinrich finished for him. "That was true regardless of my name or former occupation." Marcus shook his head, trying to process this revelation. "So yesterday, when you came to my apartment, looked at my work." "I was looking at your work," Heinrich said simply. "Nothing more, nothing less." "But why? Why help me?" Heinrich was quiet for a moment. "Because talent deserves recognition. Because you helped an old man without expectation of reward. Because sometimes life requires a small push in the right direction." He glanced at his daughter. "And because I'm a meddlesome old man who can't quite give up his influence, according to some." Clara rolled her eyes affectionately. "Well, meddlesome or not, in this case, I think you may have found something worthwhile." She turned back to Marcus. "Assuming you're interested in our emerging artists exhibition?" "Yes," Marcus said quickly. "Yes, absolutely." "Good. Let's discuss terms then." "And Mr. Tate," Clara added with a small smile, "in the future you might want to research who you're helping across streets. It could save some confusion." The meeting lasted another hour, during which Marcus signed his first gallery contract. 2 of his paintings would be displayed in the upcoming exhibition, with the possibility of more based on reception. Clara also connected him with an artist's residence program that offered subsidized housing in exchange for teaching community art classes twice a week, solving his immediate housing crisis. When they finally left the gallery, Marcus felt like he was floating. The eviction notice and rejection letter from yesterday, now distant memories. Heinrich walked beside him, using his cane more heavily than he had earlier. "I don't know how to thank you," Marcus said as they stood on the sidewalk outside the gallery. Heinrich waved away his gratitude. "You already did. Yesterday, when you extended your hand to a stranger, that was nothing compared to what you've done for me." "No," Heinrich said firmly. "That's where you're wrong, Marcus. What I did was make a phone call to my daughter. What you did was show kindness without agenda, without knowing who I was or what I could do for you. That is far rarer and far more valuable." A taxi pulled up to the curb. Heinrich had called it while they were inside. "I should be going," Heinrich said. "I find these excursions more tiring than I used to." "Will I see you again?" Marcus asked. Heinrich smiled. "I would like to see how your work evolves. And perhaps you wouldn't mind occasionally helping an old critic cross streets." He handed Marcus a card, different from the one he'd given yesterday. This one had an address. "Sunday dinners, 6 p.m. Clara comes when she's not too busy with the gallery. You would be welcome." Marcus took the card carefully, as if it might dissolve in his fingers. "I'd like that." Heinrich nodded once, then got into the taxi. Before closing the door, he looked up at Marcus. "Remember, young man, technique can be taught. Perspective can be refined. But kindness and truth, those must come from within. Don't lose them as you gain success." With that, he closed the door, and the taxi pulled away into the New York traffic. Marcus stood on the sidewalk, watching until the taxi disappeared around a corner. Then he looked down at the card in his hand, at the gallery contract in his pocket, and felt something unfamiliar bloom in his chest. Not just hope, but possibility. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the center of Wolf Gallery, surrounded by his work. Not just 2 paintings now, but 15, his first solo exhibition. The crowd moved around him, glasses of champagne in hand, murmurs of appreciation floating through the air. His technique had improved dramatically under Heinrich's occasional but pointed guidance. His color choices were more deliberate, his brushwork more controlled when it needed to be, more expressive when the subject demanded it. But the emotional core of his work remained unchanged. The ability to capture moments of human connection, vulnerability, and resilience. Clara appeared at his elbow, elegant in a black dress. "Congratulations," she said. 3 sold already, and we've had inquiries about 4 more. Marcus nodded, still not quite believing this was his reality. "Is Heinrich coming?" "He's already here," Clara said, nodding toward the far corner of the gallery. There sat Heinrich in a comfortable chair the gallery staff had placed specifically for him, holding court with 3 of New York's most prominent collectors. He caught Marcus's eye across the room and gave a small nod of approval. But what held Marcus's attention was the painting hanging on the wall behind Heinrich, the centerpiece of the exhibition. It showed an elderly man and a younger one crossing a rain-slicked street, the younger offering his arm, the older accepting it. Neither face was clearly visible, but their postures told the story. Mutual respect, unexpected connection, the simple human act of helping another across a difficult passage. Marcus had titled it Crossings. As he watched, Heinrich turned to look at the painting behind him, then back at Marcus. The old critic smiled, a full, genuine smile that reached his eyes and erased decades from his face. And in that moment, Marcus understood that the true gift Heinrich had given him wasn't the introduction to the gallery or the guidance on technique. It was the reminder that art, like life, begins with seeing others clearly, with extending a hand across the divide that separates us, never knowing where that simple act of kindness might lead. The rain outside tapped against the gallery windows, but inside, warmth and light prevailed. Marcus raised his champagne glass slightly in Heinrich's direction, a silent toast to unexpected crossings, to second chances, and to the profound truth that sometimes the most important journeys begin with a single step off a curb.